to the Cannabis Data Science Meetup Group. Happy to have you here as always. So we've got an awesome day ahead of us. So going to talk about economic surplus today. So this is an introduction to economics that I've been wanting to do here for a little while, and just gotten put on pause, but the Python saying is now is better than never. So we'll go ahead and kick off with that today. Without further ado, let's just go ahead and do a quick round of introductions. That way we can have a nice discussion throughout talking about economics, plus Canvas data as always today. So I'm going to start in my top left corner. So Camila, you wouldn't mind introducing yourself real quick?
Sure. Hi, how are you?
Awesome.
Fine. So I'm Camila Coelho. I'm an industrial designer. I'm actually currently studying communication design, and I want to dig in data visualization. So I was looking for different things around data, and I'm a cannabis user, so also it was like matching. So I'm here because of that.
You're in the right spot.
Great.
So happy to have you. Ryan, would you introduce yourself, please?
Yes. I'm Ryan. I'm from Long Island, New York. I'm an applied math and economics graduate. I'm currently doing a boot camp in data analytics. I'm a long-time medical cannabis user. I'm actually kind of winding down on that. But it's funny, the less I'm using the medical stuff, the more interested I am in how it works.
Well, awesome to have you, Ryan. You can keep us on our toes with economics, and also happy to hear about your experience with the New York market because they'll be coming online soon. So interested to have your experience there.
Awesome. This should be a great review of economics for me.
Awesome. Well, like I said, keep us on our toes. So, Marjane, would you please introduce yourself?
Hey everyone, nice to meet all of you. I was an academic research scientist for 10 years, moved to software engineering, and I enjoy cannabis and cannabis data, so here I am. Nice to meet everyone.
Awesome to have you here, Marjana. Heather, would you please introduce yourself, and then I can go last.
Oh, hey, I'm Heather. I'm not really doing well today, but just kind of curious for Ryan if they still have that pre-packed ground flower in New York still.
We do.
That's unfortunate. I'm so sorry to hear that.
I know. It is what it is, though.
Right. Okay, I'm so sorry. I'm not really well,
yes.
but it's nice meeting everybody.
Well,
I'm really happy to be here.
Awesome. I'm happy to have you here, Heather. And then Graham, happy to see you here today. We're just doing a quick round of introductions, so you wouldn't mind taking 30 seconds and introducing yourself to the group real quick, and then I will.
Yeah, my name is Graham Anashevsky. I live in Maryland, where we only have a medical market, but I used to be a data scientist working in space. I was a contractor with SpaceX, but I got hit with a deadly disease, and it's forever changed me. As you can see, I shake while I talk, but cannabis is my medicine, and I'd like to use my skills in data science, and I have a master's in mathematics and deep learning, so I have a deep basis of understanding with, I guess, the model of all this. I've studied supply chain management, economic PDEs, all that stuff. I just don't know all the terminology, I guess, with this, and I'm just looking to see if, I can search for a job opportunity once I get through all this rehab to use my skills in cannabis. And I'm really interested to see what data science models we were looking for, because I was pretty confused on Saturday.
Exactly. So happy to have you. And Graham, you can keep us on our toes too, because your experience with data science will just keep everybody sharp. And there's a high demand for people with your skill set in the cannabis industry. So happy to have you aboard.
Oh, yeah, and I should also say, I am a heavy smoker, and I've been smoking for about a decade. I don't know your guys' experience, but I've been around the game for a while. Let's just say that.
Well, always happy to hear about your experience too. And Heather's also in Maryland too. So
Yeah.
so yeah, it'll be interesting to have all of your experiences. So, and then just to get you into the conversation, Mel. So we're just doing a round of introductions. So you wouldn't mind introducing yourself to the group real quick?
Oh, hi, everybody. I just ran into this meetup on meetups. So I was just interested. I've been working as a data scientist for the past few years. So I just wanted to see what you can do with cannabis data, because, you know, in the recent years, cannabis market has been growing. Personally, I don't smoke or do any. Yeah, so I was just curious.
Well, happy to have you. There's people from all walks of life here. So we're a big merry group of data scientists. So this is awesome. So a lot of skills here in this group today. So we can definitely get a lot accomplished. And then yet another guest. So please correct me if I'm not pronouncing it correctly, but Darm Paul or
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's a Dharmpal. You can call me DP for the short one. Actually, first time I joined here, and I just set up the Google Meet, in fact, because I joined the meetup group recently, and every time, like, some one or other group is being used to have the these discussions. So today I was late because of that one, and I had to set it up like with my short name as DP. So that is easy for everyone to pronounce.
awesome.
Thank
Well,
you.
happy to have you, DP. So we're a big group of married data scientists here. So my name's Keegan. So I started a company, Canlytics. So my experience was working in the cannabis testing space. And so I thought, well, we can probably, utilize my experience as a, number cruncher, statistician, and, help people set up data pipelines. And so working in the industry for a while, I realized there's a really big demand for data analytics, data science. And so I thought I would share with you some of the issues at hand, what people are talking about, where some of the data can be found, and what analytics you can do with real public data. So it's almost like there's just gold laying there right on the table. So there's just treasure to be had, and you all have the skill set to go out there and mine some data treasure. So long story short, I can just show you some data sources today just to talk about a little bit of economics and just show you what you can potentially do. And then I'm happy to hear from all of you about what you may be curious about doing with the data, because this is just my perspective on the data. I come from an economics background. So as Graham pointed out, so on Saturday we talked about the statistical model, the instrumental variable model. So tune in on Saturday and we'll talk about this again, likely. And so long story short, Graham's keeping me on my toes, Mel, Camila, Ryan, DP, Marjana, and Heather. So we can all keep each other on our toes here. So without further ado, I'll just go ahead and spend a little bit of time here and just introduce to you some economics and some data that I've been looking at in Illinois and Massachusetts, and then we can have a discussion about that. Anyone want to say anything real quick? Or?
Not as such, but I'm not sure, like, what, because I just, as I said, like, okay, I'm for first time here, so I recently started doing this data science work, and I try to find out, like, if in my existing organization, if I can find some opportunities to do some data analytics or this kind of work, basically, like what data can tell me, basically, because right now what we know is what we know, but what we don't know is something like the patterns, the hidden patterns within the data, which can tell us, okay, hey, you may work on certain things. So it's just my thing is like just a startup. I really don't know like what I'm going to discover over here. So but you said like the economics and like some of the other things. I'm excited, basically. I'm sorry. I would be like, okay, more curious to have a lot of questions, but I right now I don't have any questions. But we will see what exactly you present, and based on that we will go forward.
Awesome, DP. And so if you
I got a
have more-
couple of questions.
Oh yes, Graham.
I would like to know any of the rules and regulations with like people growing and stuff. I only say that because in Maryland they have very strict, you have to grow it in a specific place, and there's only so many grow sites you can have in terms of this. But I've heard in New England and stuff, they have a little freer reign to have small like cannabis companies and small dispensaries to start up.
Yes. So we'll be looking today just at, the Massachusetts Cannabis Control Commission. So different states have put together their own bodies to, legislate cannabis. So it's definitely a state by state basis at the moment, because as you're all aware, cannabis is still, not permitted federally. So basically certain states have enacted legislation to allow or to permit people to operate in their states. So exactly. So as Graham pointed out, so in Maryland has their own legislative body. I don't know it off the top of my head, but you can just probably do a search. Maryland Cannabis Regulators. Do you know, Heather, what the body may be?
By body, well, one thing I know is there's a number of there are only a certain number of licenses that can be distributed, and you can actually see the names of all the 3 testing sites as well in Maryland. So there are very few of those. Quite the monopoly at the testing site, just want to say there. And then also certain brands like Culta will actually prevent dispensaries from giving coupons or other discounts. That's something that they can do. So all this market data can be completely blown up by Culta. Yeah, so just want to say that. That's maybe a bias coming in there, but that's just my opinion, is that, well, it's my observation is that there are companies in Maryland that can dictate when and how discounts are applied to the customer. Thank you.
And may I just add on to that too? There is a pretty heavy monopoly, oligopoly on the grow sites in Maryland as well. There are only several small town grow operations that still have licenses to grow and sell. G-Leaf has bought out over 75% of the market.
Yes.
So it's very difficult to do price action with them, because basically what they said, everyone has to follow. It's really awful in Maryland.
Thank you, Graham. Thank you.
I spend over $20,000 a year on my medicine. I have
believe
to
you.
use it constantly.
I believe you. I believe you, and I live that. So please know that.
Yeah, and I hate Culta too. They
Well,
they
Graham,
have a bad rep in Baltimore and Maryland, man.
you've brought up an interesting point here,
Serious. Thank you.
because this is exactly what we're here to do. Is essentially we need to get this data that's locked up here with the Maryland Medical Cannabis Commission, and as you exactly said, try to quantify, is Maryland sort of in the oligopolistic competition, so long story short, do these producers have a lot of monopoly power, and can they raise prices on consumers like yourself? So long story short, we need to start getting this data and making it accessible. So this has sort of been a side project of Cannalytics here, is we would love to be able to get data and regulations for each of the states, and make it publicly available, so that way we can just know off the top of our head what the regulations are in Maryland or Massachusetts or Illinois or where have you. So if you want to contribute, I've started these two projects here. So, we've just started, the Cannabis Data Science meetup group, where we just do a little bit of exploratory analysis, try to find data from various states and just begin crunching statistics. And then if you want a more formalized project, I'm putting together Cannalytics AI, which will essentially just try to scrape all of the various states. So that way, we can collect data from Alaska, Arizona, California, all the way through Maryland and, all the way to Washington State. So that way we can actually compare how these different states are functioning here. Because as you pointed out, it doesn't seem like Maryland's very competitive. So it would be interesting to quantify that. So thank you for bringing that point up, Graham. Well, without further ado, let's talk about some of the economics while we're at it, and then we can show you how, or I can show you how I've begun to scrape data from Illinois and Massachusetts, publicly available resources. So, and Ryan, you can attest to this. So I would always tell people, the reason you study economics is so that you don't get fooled by economists. And so this quote goes back to an economist who was born 100 years ago. And, make of it what you will, but I always get a good laugh out of this quote. And so, I'm going to be talking about economics today, but, don't get fooled by me. If anything sounds counterintuitive or doesn't make logical sense to you, then question it and think about it deeply. Because, good economics, should be, be able to be explained quickly and simply.
Can I just add quickly? I think that quote is so important, especially in a day where policymakers just throwing up these big spending bills, big economics plans, saying stuff like, this is not going to cost you anything. And they cite these economists. This is why it's important that everyone kind of needs to know what exactly is happening. I mean, obviously for here, but just in general, like, I think everyone having a basis in economics is so important. I wish there'd be more done in the K through 12 education in relation to that.
Exactly. And so that, falls on the presenter a lot, because it's a high bar, but I believe that if you firmly have concepts under your belt, that you should be able to convey them to anyone. So exactly. So like you said, less hand waving and more making sure that everybody's on board, and yeah, like you said, don't just take things for granted. So so but awesome, Ryan. So as you can see, Ryan's schooled in economics and is pretty skeptical about it. But okay. Anywho, we've begun to basically look at the number of retailers and then the revenue per retailer as a sort of a metric of profitability. And so what we're trying to uncover is, are there essentially, rules in place that may make, certain places, more profitable for retailers or producers to operate in. And, conversely, there's a other side of that coin there. I'm actually going to back up to this. I'm just going to start here, I think. So, basically, the reason we're talking about this is, there's, essentially two sides to the coin here, right? So, yes, it's awesome, for the producers to, make a nice surplus here, but the consumers are operating in the market too, and they get a certain amount of value out of their purchases. And so you can begin to quantify this. So if you just look at the quantity sold in the market and the prices, if there weren't any anti-competitive forces and it was just free information and just no transaction costs and just everything just worked out frictionless, then you would experience what's called the perfectly competitive market equilibrium. And so here marginal benefit is exactly equal to marginal cost, and you've got what's called like an efficient market here. So this is sort of the ideal that everything's compared to. What you observe, in reality is, you observe things such as, taxes. So, various markets will be taxed. And so, cannabis is one of the goods that is taxed. And, there are various reasons why you may do a tax. So, for example, you do see taxes on other goods, such as, say, alcohol or cigarettes. And one reason you can do a tax is just to discourage consumption. So, that's a way that people have discouraged cigarette consumption, is just by levying a high tax on it. And then, you'll, reduce consumption, and you'll get this tax revenue, and then you can spend that on other markets that you may think have what's called like a public externality. So basically the government will sort of redistribute this tax revenue from the cannabis market to another market. So you'll see maybe they'll subsidize some, or so they'll add more funding to education. And so that's a whole nother market of its own. So long story short, this is what the effect of a tax is. And so as you can see, some consumers are boxed out of the market, and the producers lose out on a bit of their surplus as well. So taxes is one thing. The main thing that I was interested in was a comparable effect that you see just from, say, quantity restrictions. So here there's no taxes levied, but you're just going to restrict the total quantity that can be allowed in the market. And I see this happening in many states, and it's hard to think of the social reason for this, except if yet again people were sort of interested in curtailing cannabis consumption, and that would just be for social preferences. So maybe, but that's a conversation for.
Are you talking restrictions on the consumer to buy a certain amount of cannabis, or restrictions on the supplier of the cannabis to the market?
Exactly. This will just be on the actual supply. So basically, what my argument is if the state says that there can only be 20 cultivators, well, normally there may, in other states you observe, 100 or 200 or more cultivators. So my argument is that you would normally see a larger quantity supplied, but they're essentially, restricting the quantity, to be a certain amount. Of course, I just realized this is maybe not the perfect example, because you could just have, well, the idea is if this was a monopoly, the monopolist would choose to operate, less than competitively. So that way they can, set prices to maximize their profit. And so the idea is, if you're operating, between, like the perfectly competitive and somewhere with more of an oligopoly, then you would expect, prices to be, towards, QM. So long story short is, my argument is, by restricting just the number of licensees, that's sort of effectively, sort of restricting QC towards QM. I'm not saying it's going to be perfectly at QM. I'm just saying that I think that having restrictions is going to push things in that direction.
Is it safe to say that having more restrictions would make, I guess, the supply, or kind of blanking out here, but it'd make it more inelastic, meaning that if there was a tax levied or something, that the price burden would be placed much more on the consumers due to these restrictions?
You do raise a good point. So, in fact, that actually goes right back to this point. So who bears the cost of the tax? It depends. So as you basically said, whoever basically has the more inelastic either demand or supply typically bears the bigger burden of either a tax or the quantity restriction. So that's a whole nother question of its own, is, what exactly is the elasticity of demand and what's the elasticity of supply? And I actually don't know. And so those are, some metrics that I think are, maybe they've been looked at it in the literature, but, these are things that, a group like ours could, begin to estimate. So
There is work on it in like botany circles.
on the elasticity of supply.
Yeah, in terms of how quickly you can turn it over, how consistent the supply can be versus how finicky it can be. Because we have diseases in here with the supply. There's outlier things. And they're trying to clean out the outlier things so we can get a more foundationally appropriate estimate of this elasticity.
Graham, do you know if these studies were done on a state or a federal level?
I believe I know NC State is doing research in hemp production and what does higher yield rate, what's correlated with a more consistent or a higher yield rate product in hemp only. But there's also research in Washington. I know Washington State University, they do a lot of research on studying diseases in cannabis, though, because it's more botany based, less economics. But they are doing research to try and standardize production, both indoor and outdoor, on a grow level.
Awesome. Okay. I need to pause for 5 minutes here. So can you please continue this conversation, and then I'll be right back to talk about the quantity restrictions here and maybe how we can parse this out in Illinois. So bear with me. I'll be back in 5 minutes, or less than. So short break here. So bear with me here.
All right.
So be right back.
So out of this group, how many people use cannabis here?
I do. I have to. I absolutely have to every day. Otherwise, I will be in a massive amount of pain and suffering. Thank you.
Yeah. It's just interesting to see here because there's different perspectives when it comes to people who use it versus outside perspectives. And one thing I've realized through coming through these meetups is that you need both, because users of it are biased to it, but people that don't use it have no idea. Because let me be honest, you really can't look at this as a purely economic thing, because the grow part of it hasn't been figured out yet. And in terms of that quantity, it varies randomly. There's a company in Canada that got billions of dollars of funding, and they went bankrupt because all of their crops were infected with mites and couldn't be used. So we do have to be wary when we're talking about this. But I understand, and it's really important that we get this economic thing down, and that's why I'm really motivated to do this. Because in Maryland, it's all for profit. And it really stings.
Thank you. That's something that needs to be acknowledged, and I'm glad that you're voicing that here. Thank you so much.
But I will fully acknowledge I know nothing about economics of this stuff. I know a lot about the chemical makeup of it, physics, and just the experience of it. Because I've been taking data for the past 2.5 years. I was told I was going to die. And here I am. So yeah, just just background for you folks who don't smoke.
Thank you. Thank you, Graham. Awesome.
Thank you for sharing your story. Well, with migrating here, so just getting resituated. So it's awesome to have you though, because essentially, I can share what I know from economics. You can bring your mathematics. Ryan can keep us sharp with economics, and then Heather's got the laboratory background. Marjana knows statistics. Camila's got data science. GP got data science as well. So I think with the group assembled just here today, there's so much value that we can add. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and just conclude real quick here with the economics and then show you how to get some data. And then we can begin systematically collecting it for all the various states. So, and I'll move through this quick. So the idea is if you had a monopolist in the market, that they would operate at QM. Of course, we don't observe, an actual monopolist, and we don't observe, an actual perfectly competitive market. So we observe someplace in between. And so I'm just conjecturing that if you see things that restrict the number of players that can operate in the market, that you may expect this to observe a Q that's closer to QM than QC. This is just pure conjecture of mine. And it may not be the case because, as we were talking about, it depends a lot on the elasticities. So the elasticity is essentially the angle of the supply curve. So the flatter the supply curve is, the more elastic it is. So basically, the more elastic the supply curve, the producers aren't really going to be that affected one way or the other by a restriction in quantity caps. So if supply is very elastic and they restrict it to one producer, that producer may still operate somewhere near the competitive market, the competitive level, if the elasticity is really really low. But if it's very inelastic, or the elasticity is very high. But if it's very inelastic, so if supply is close to vertical, or if there's inelastic demand, if demand is close to vertical, then either the consumers or the suppliers are going to bear a large cost from restrictions. So there's various reasons why you may think supply may be inelastic, and there's arguments why you could argue that demand would be inelastic, right? Some people, right, they're going to consume whether the price is low or very high. They're just going to. Arguably, there'll be some people that get boxed out. So once again, you can break the market up into different segments of demand. But long story short is, my hypothesis is, and this is just going to be my beginning attempt at trying to go about studying it. So this is sort of, just my rough draft, just my rough analysis, here in front of you. But basically what I'm thinking is, right, we're not going to observe QC, we're not going to observe QM. However, in all the various states, I think we're going to observe some Q somewhere in between here, some price somewhere in between here, with certain states being closer to the monopolistic side and certain states being closer to the competitive side. noting that all the states are going to be different. So that, right, all the states have different populations. All the states have different factors that affect their supply. So supply and demand are going to be different in all the various states, and they're going to be different over time. So you're going to expect prices and quantities to either be shifting along the curve over time as policies may change, or you may see shifts in demand curves or shifts in supply curves. So you may see a shift in the demand curve if the population increases, or you may see entirely downward shift in the supply curve if there's like some brand new technology introduced into the market. So you're going to see all these shifts all over the place. And so in this chaotic world where we're seeing these data points moving all over the place, is there any way that we can parse out where exactly states are in the market, and if they're potentially heading towards a competitive output, or if they potentially are heading towards a monopolistic output? So that's my big question, is where are states now in, say, this dichotomy between monopolist and competitive, and what's their trajectory? So that's my grand research question. And first steps first, we need to get the data. So I'll go ahead and share these scripts with you. And so this is essentially how I was beginning to get the data from Illinois. So they have data here in PDFs. So you've got licensee data and you've got sales data. And we just need a nice automated way to get this data out of these PDFs. So all you data scientists out there who use Python, I think you're going to love this tool. So I've been pretty excited about it myself, but it's PDF Plumber. So they use a clever way to extract data from PDFs. Essentially, they just look at your PDF and try to find any grid lines, and then just return you the data as an array. So that way, instead of just trying to parse all the text and trying to think about tabs and this and that, they actually use the grid lines and return to you a nice array. So long story short, we can now automate the collection of the Illinois data here. So let's see if we can't download this data here. Just go ahead. Okay, so long story short, we're just going to download this data as a PDF. Then we can read the data into an array. So that way we can begin the cleaning process. So just have a giant 2D array here. And so we can use our own column names and just create a nice data frame of licensees. And so this is just retailers. However, this is good data, so we can clean this up a bit. So, and this can be refined a bit more, but this is essentially just parsing out street, city, state, zip code, and phone number from this block here. So now, we know how many retailers there are in Illinois. And Graham and everyone else, don't let me just get so fixated on certain states. So as Graham pointed out, we need to unlock this data here from Maryland. So perhaps, this could be another good project, is somehow trying to unlock this data. So, but for now, we've got retailer data in Illinois. We can also unlock the sales data. And once again, we read this as just a giant array of data that will need to be cleaned up here. So simple enough. Once again, using our own column names, using a bit of logic to determine the year and month. And then we've got a nice time series of data. Well, not yet. Still have a bit of cleaning to do. So basically, these next few lines create a time index and then remove all of the extraneous values. So those can be removed. And this third block handles the dollar signs, because as you can see, we've read the data in with dollar signs and need to convert that to numeric values. This line of code simply just converts the time index here. See how everything is indexed at the beginning of the month. My personal preference is just to index things at the end of the month, because to me that just makes more logical sense. So for example, when you're talking about monthly sales, it just makes sense, like, oh, that was the sales for the month. This is entirely my personal preference, but it makes a difference when you're doing the coding. So, long story short, we now have the sales data nicely parsed for us. Awesome. And so we can begin to really calculate some interesting statistics here that you don't see many people calculating, and let alone showing you the methods. And that's what we believe a lot of the scientific process is all about, right? You're all about, showing your methods about how you get your results. So I personally believe, if you're, preparing statistics and presenting people with data, it's important to show your processes and, be upfront about assumptions made along the way. Because as we demonstrated, there's a lot of cleaning that needs to be done along the way. So long story short, we can begin to look at some real cool statistics here. So we've got when the license were issued. So given when they're issued, we can get a count of how many retailers were operating over time, because that's one of the dimensions we're interested in, right? We're interested in, right, quantity and price, but we're also interested in time and the state as well. So we can basically get a nice count of the retailers over time. And this is sort of where I was starting to get into the quantity restrictions. So and we'll compare Illinois to, say, Massachusetts and other states. But, you know, in all the states, you see this, you know, gradual increase of, you know, retailers and cultivators as, you know, people are coming online and setting up their shop and opening up shop. In Illinois, though, you just see this cap. You know, they you know, I do believe they've allowed more licensees into the market as of late. But, you know, the Illinois is sort of, you know, they're sort of famous for capping their licenses. And so, you know, here you do just observe this, you know, cap in retailers at 110. And so that's sort of what I was talking about here. So I feel like, you know, that cap is almost kind of capping the potential quantity that could be produced. And so I don't think you're at QM per se, right? Because there's 110, you know, retailers. It's not a monopolist, which is one. But I don't feel that we're quite at QC. So long story short is, I think it would be interesting, you know, to measure, you know, Illinois and maybe compare it to other states and try to conjecture, you know, what would be, you know, the competitive quantity, and, you know, what would be, you know, competitive prices, like if you'd let more people into the market. And like we said, we may not be able to just pinpoint what QC is, but, you know, a lot of what economics is about is marginal changes. So we could basically say, you know, what would be the effect of, you know, allowing, you know, one more retailer into the market be. So that's essentially what we're trying to uncover here is, you know, what would be the effect of, you know, allowing more people to operate in the market, or at least that's sort of the question I'm after. And so a lot of this is supporting statistics. So I'll just walk through these briefly. So basically just grabbing the population and looking at retailers per capita. And so this is a nice standardized metric that you can use to compare state to state. So this is retailers per 100,000 people. So that way we can start to compare Illinois to other states, you know, controlling for factors such as population. And then, as we pointed out, we can begin to look at things like sales per retailer to try to get a measure of profitability. And join us. Oh, yes. And here's, I just did a few annual statistics. So here we just looked at, you know, retailers per capita in 2020, and then sales per retailer in 2020. And then, you know, in 2021, you know, you do actually see a doubling in, you know, retailers per capita. Of course, although it doubled, it's, you know, the nominal value 0.82 is still quite low. And so, you know, so long story short, we're starting to get a couple data points here about the competitiveness in Illinois, but just scratching the surface. And so there's still a lot more to do. And so just going to go ahead and tease, definitely recommend tuning in on Saturday, because we've started to talk about instrumental variables and how we could potentially actually try to estimate movement along the demand curve potentially as people are allowed into the market. So that's what we're trying to measure. But, you know, just to kind of show you where we are. we still are far from. So right, we're trying to draw a nice supply and demand curve with price and quantity, and this is our best attempt at drawing a demand curve so far, and it's got a positive slope. So Ryan can attest that the law of demand insists that we have a negatively sloped demand curve here. So the long story short, actually, I'm not even certain I'm measuring the thing I'm thinking I am. Okay, I think I'm going to go ahead and pause it there because I think I just I don't think I ran the correct regression here. Yes, this is an entirely different regression. So pardon me there. So long story short, as you can see, I'm still sort of in the exploratory stages, but we're starting to get scripts here that we can actually use to aggregate the data from Illinois. And then I'll share this script with you where we can aggregate data from Massachusetts's Cannabis Control Commission, and we'll keep at it. So I'm going to take a look at what we can do about Maryland data. And then if any of you want to contribute, then think of a good state and jump right in. And
Hey,
see if you
Keegan.
can't come up with a good collection scheme yourself. So that's where we are today. But any thoughts, questions, comments here at the end?
I think Mariana.
Yeah, Keegan. Can we also look at Michigan recreational cannabis data? I'm
Michigan.
from Michigan. Yeah. Right now, they don't have data sets. It's not as savvy as Massachusetts, the Cannabis Commission there. They mostly have PDFs. Yeah, but I've been looking at that, and their tables don't look as nicely set up as Illinois. But
Okay, so we may have to be creative. So we'll see if we can't use PDF Plumber, and then we may have to find other tools in the toolbox. But yes, let's definitely look at Michigan. So there's a lot of action going on in Michigan, and
yes.
I think we've only looked at it cursorily before. So I'm happy to take a look at that. So let's go ahead and put that on the agenda for next week. So Michigan data, and then Graham's mentioned Virginia data. So if anyone else has recommendations,
I would love Michigan because I have to travel Michigan frequently,
Oh, okay.
and I've experienced their cannabis. There is a huge opportunity there.
Absolutely. Yes.
They grow grass, and by that I mean stuff you feed cows, not stuff you want to use. It's
No,
a-
and Graham, you bring up a great point. I think the problem here is quality control.
yeah, just look at Oregon and Oklahoma.
Mhm.
you do raise a good point. So all the states have different challenges. So I just heard, anecdotally, just from what I've read, there's some heavy metal concerns. Like for example, like in Oklahoma, right? That's something that you have to watch out for. But
Because heavy metals are toxic to me. That's the
Yes.
disease. This is why I'm in this thing.
exactly. And this is a big concern I have. So, for example, we looked at residual solvents and concentrates, and it's just I don't know. It's just something that it just struck an accord with me that it's worth looking at. So, and we've got a big group of talented data scientists here. So, let's see what we can do and try to add some value.
This is motivating me to kind of dive into New York. One, because I know it has heavy regulations. I think some of them are very much welcome, though. There's a big thing. I think it was like vitamin E. I could be mixing that up, but like that's been like so prevalent in some other states. But like New York regulations make sure that none of that went into the vaping products. Just recently they got into actual green marijuana, but it is crushed up, unfortunately. And now we just legalize marijuana on a recreational level. So I'm just intrigued to like dive in more to my state. And I kind of want to get some data now before the recreational stuff goes into play, so then I can see how the recreational marijuana affects the market.
Exactly. And that's something that we love to put together at Canlytics, is basically just a nice comparison of these regulations from state to state, because it's not apples to apples in all the states. The limits are different in all the states. The actual compounds they're testing for are different from state to state. So there's a lot of good standardization that can be done by a talented group of data scientists like ourselves. So you're going to say something, Graham?
No, I'm sorry. I guess that was my breath. My bad.
Oh, yes. Well, until next week, let's just all keep our nose to the grindstone. And then Graham, Marjana, Ryan, Heather, Camila, DP, if you make any discoveries along the way, feel free to reach out. And so, or if you have any questions about any of the work we've done. So let's, try to make this a nice collaboration. And then on Saturday, we'll see if we can't find any interesting instrumental variables to parse out supply and demand a bit more. And then next Wednesday, we'll do a deep dive on Michigan.
Sounds great. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you all for attending today. I hope you have an awesome, productive, and enjoyable week and a day today. So enjoy yourselves.
See ya. Bye.
All right, bye now.
Hey, guys.
Thank you,
Bye.
you too. Bye.
Thank you. Take care.